You were born into a story that was already running. By the time you could speak, the script was handed to you. This is what a normal life looks like. This is what matters. This is what is real. School repeated it, television amplified it, and your family enforced it. You were promised that if you stayed inside the lines, reality would behave, and you would be safe, successful, and sane. But look around. Anxiety is normal. Numbness is normal. Quiet desperation is normal. If this is normal, maybe the problem is not you. Maybe the problem is the story itself. In this video, I want to walk you out of that story and show you something uncomfortable. Reality was never what you were promised, and normal was the name of the cage. Let's start with the word normal itself. It sounds neutral, scientific, almost compassionate. In practice, it is a psychological weapon. Normal is the label culture uses to reward obedience and punish deviation without ever admitting it. If you fit the template, you are told you are healthy, responsible, adjusted. If you don't, you are told you are broken, lazy, immature, or sick. Notice the trick: culture defines the template and then prescribes treatment for anyone who doesn't match it. The illusion is that this template is natural and inevitable. The reality is that it is designed, updated, and enforced by human beings, many of whom are themselves confused, fearful, and lost. As a child, you did not agree to this template. You absorbed it. You watched your parents' faces for micro-approvals and micro-rejections. You learned which emotions were allowed in your home and which ones were punished or ignored. You learned what topics made the adults go silent. You learned how small you needed to make yourself to keep love available. All of this happened before you had the language to question it. By the time you could think critically, the code had already installed. You did not just learn a language. The language began to shape what you could notice and what you could even imagine. That is the first layer of the illusion of normal. It starts before you have any defenses. Psychology gives simple names to these deep distortions, schemas, attachment patterns, cognitive biases. It sounds technical, but what it means is this: your nervous system builds a model of how the world works before you are old enough to check whether any of it is true. If your early world was tense, unpredictable, or emotionally absent, your model of normal becomes tension, unpredictability, and absence. Later, you will walk into a room full of calm people and feel like something is wrong. You will sabotage peace because it does not match your internal definition of reality. You will call chaos home and think you are making rational choices. This is not stupidity, this is conditioning. On top of that early conditioning sits another layer: the perceptual limits of the human nervous system itself. Your brain does not show you reality. It shows you a low-resolution summary that is just good enough to keep your body alive and your social status stable. Neuroscience calls this a predictive model. The brain predicts what it expects to see and then edits incoming data to match those predictions. In other words, you are not seeing the world. You are seeing your expectations of the world, slightly corrected by raw sensation. You live inside a controlled hallucination that has been trained by your past. Culture then steps in and calls this hallucination normal. Consider how narrow your sensory channel actually is. You see only a thin slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. You hear only a narrow band of frequencies. Your awareness can handle only a few pieces of information at a time. Meanwhile, the universe continues on every scale, from subatomic storms to galactic structures, completely indifferent to whether you understand any of it. Yet inside this tiny bubble of perception, we confidently say, "This is reality. This is how things are. This is what a life should look like." The illusion of normal is not just social, it is perceptual. It is the confidence of a creature with very limited access to the real, announcing that its local hallucination is the final map. Now add culture to this already fragile setup. Culture is a consensus hallucination. It is a shared story about what matters, what exists, and what is allowed. It is not written in stone. It is broadcast every day through media, education, laws, advertising, and casual conversation. You did not choose most of your beliefs, you downloaded them. You inherited your religion, your political preferences, your sense of what is successful from people who inherited theirs. At scale, this becomes normal. Not because it is true, but because it is repeated. The human nervous system is biased toward repetition. What you hear many times begins to feel correct simply because it is familiar. The promise you were given was simple. If you play the game correctly, reality will reward you. Study, work, find a partner, buy things, keep busy, stay within the script, and life will make sense. That promise was never honest. It ignored the basic facts of existence, impermanence, uncertainty, mortality, and randomness. It sold you the idea of control in a universe that does not offer guarantees. When loss comes, when illness appears, when plans collapse, you feel not only pain but betrayal. This wasn't supposed to happen, you think. But that sentence reveals the core illusion. Who told you what was supposed to happen? On what authority? The psychological cost of this broken promise is everywhere. People live with a constant background hum of anxiety because their inner model of reality is trying to enforce an order that does not exist. You were told life should be linear. It is not. You were told good behavior is rewarded. It often isn't. You were told that adults know what they are doing. Many don't. To cope with this mismatch, the mind does something clever and tragic. It blames itself. If I am not happy inside this system, the problem must be me. Depression, in many cases, is not a sign of individual failure. It is a signal that the map you were given does not fit the territory you are walking through. At this point, the obvious question appears: if normal is an illusion, what is real? The answer is not mystical or poetic. Reality is what remains when your story about it fails. Reality is the set of conditions you cannot negotiate with: your body, your limits, your needs, your death, the death of others, the unpredictability of events, the fact that you do not control other people's minds. Normal tries to cover these facts with routines and roles. But when a loss rips through your life, or when an unexpected crisis shatters your schedule, you meet the raw texture of existence. For a brief moment, the cultural trance breaks, and you see how thin your idea of how things are supposed to be really was. Human consciousness sits in a strange position. On one hand, it is shaped by biology, culture, and personal history. On the other hand, it can observe all of that. You can notice your conditioning. You can notice the voice in your head repeating your parents' fears. You can notice the cultural narrative telling you what to want. That observing capacity is the crack in the illusion. Most people never use it. They live as if their thoughts were facts and their programming was identity. But the moment you realize, I am not my conditioning, I am the one seeing the conditioning, a new kind of responsibility appears. You are no longer just a character in the story. You become a co-author. This is where the idea of cosmic psychology becomes useful. Instead of studying the mind only inside the boundaries of a career and a family, we place it inside the full context of the universe and of evolution. You are not just a worker, a student, a parent, or a consumer. You are a primate on a small planet orbiting an ordinary star in a galaxy that is one of billions, existing for a brief moment between two unknowns. The nervous system you carry was not designed for stock markets, social media, and constant information. It was shaped over millions of years for small groups, immediate threats, and direct experience. Calling your stress abnormal in this context is dishonest. The environment is abnormal, the human animal is improvising. From this wider perspective, normal becomes a moving target. What is considered normal in one era would be madness in another. There were times when it was normal to burn people for having the wrong ideas about God. There are cultures where hearing voices is not a psychiatric emergency but a spiritual event. In some societies, working yourself to the point of collapse is praised. In others, it is seen as foolish. These shifts reveal a key point. Normal is a local agreement, not a universal truth. When you treat it as truth, you shrink your life to fit a temporary script. When you see it as agreement, you gain the freedom to renegotiate. But renegotiating comes with a price. The system does not like people who step outside the script. Families may react with guilt and anger. Institutions may label you difficult, disloyal, or ungrateful. Friends may feel threatened when you question the values all of you once shared. This social pressure is one of the strongest forces keeping the illusion of normal in place. You are not just afraid of being wrong, you are afraid of being alone. The herd fear is real. In evolutionary terms, being cast out used to mean death. Today, it usually means discomfort and awkward conversations, but your nervous system still reacts as if exile were fatal. So you censor your questions to stay included. Let's look at some of the core promises of normal reality and examine them one by one. Promise 1. Productivity equals worth. You were taught to measure your value by output, achievements, and visible success. This is convenient for economic systems that need workers and consumers. It is disastrous for the psyche. When your sense of self is tied to performance, rest feels like guilt. Curiosity feels like a distraction, and failure feels like annihilation. The deeper reality is that you existed before you produced anything. Your worth is not an achievement, it is a given. You can still choose to build, create, and contribute, but now from clarity, not from terror of being nothing. Promise 2. Stability is possible if you plan well enough. You are sold planners, insurance strategies, and methods designed to promise control. Planning is useful, control is largely imaginary. No spreadsheet can prevent illness, accident, or sudden change. The universe is not a machine built around your comfort. It is a dynamic process in which you are a temporary pattern. When you cling to stability as a right, you suffer twice, once from the event itself and once from the belief that it should not have happened. Questioning this promise does not mean becoming careless. It means replacing fantasy control with realistic adaptability. Promise 3. Growth is linear. From school grading to career ladders, you are shown charts that go up and to the right. Life does not. Psychological development is cyclical and often chaotic. You revisit old wounds from new angles. You make progress and then repeat old patterns. You expand, contract, and expand again. When you believe in linear growth, every regression feels like failure. In reality, regression is often integration. The mind loops back to areas it could not fully process before. Calling this not normal is a misunderstanding of how deep change actually works. Promise 4. Identity is solid. You are encouraged to pick a label, career, gender, ideology, personality type, and treat it as the final word on who you are. This solid identity is comfortable because it simplifies decisions. It is also a trap. Your experience is fluid. You contain contradictions, changing preferences, and multiple roles. When you cling to a rigid self-concept, you begin editing out parts of your own experience to keep the story intact. You say, "I'm not the kind of person who," and reality quietly replies, "Let's see." The illusion of a fixed normal self protects you from uncertainty at the price of genuine discovery. So if normal is an illusion built from early conditioning, limited perception, cultural repetition, and fragile promises, what do you do with that information? The first step is not dramatic. It is observational. You begin to treat your idea of how life is supposed to be as a hypothesis, not a fact. You notice when you feel that something is wrong, and you ask, wrong according to which script? You notice when you feel shame for being different, and you ask, who gave me this standard? You notice when fear arises at the thought of changing, and you recognize that fear as the nervous system's ancient response to possible exile. You don't fight it, you see it. The second step is to reclaim your attention. Culture is in the business of hijacking your limited perception and filling it with prefabricated narratives. Infinite scroll, endless content, marketing that addresses your fears and insecurities, all of it is designed to turn your awareness into a commodity. In that environment, deep reflection is not normal, distraction is. You reverse this by making attention a conscious choice. You decide what you are available for. You turn off some of the noise, not to be pure, but to be able to hear your own questions again. Without reclaimed attention, any talk of waking up from the illusion remains theoretical. The third step is to experiment with new definitions of reality in small, concrete ways. If your normal says, work comes before everything, try treating rest as non-negotiable for a week and observe what happens. If your normal says, I must be liked by everyone, practice telling one mild truth that risks disapproval and see whether you survive. If your normal says, this is just who I am, test one small behavior that contradicts that story. Psychology is experimental by nature. You do not escape an illusion by arguing with it in your head. You escape it by running tests in reality and taking your own data seriously. The fourth step is to widen your frame beyond your personal story. Cosmic psychology means you keep one eye on the larger context. When you are crushed by a social failure, remember that you are on a rock in space, circling a star that will eventually die, in a universe that does not keep score. This is not meant to depress you, it is meant to resize your problems. Most of what culture calls catastrophic is trivial in cosmic terms. This does not make pain unreal, it makes it relative. In that relative space, you can choose where to invest your limited energy. You can stop sacrificing your inner life to maintain appearances in a story that is already dissolving. There is a risk here, and it is important to name it. When people first see through the illusion of normal, they may swing to the opposite extreme. They reject all structure, all convention, all responsibility, and call it freedom. This is just another reaction, another script. I am the one who opposes everything. Real liberation is quieter. It does not require you to signal your rebellion. It allows you to use parts of the old system when they are practical, without believing they define you. You can still pay bills, show up to work, and participate in society while knowing that none of this is the ultimate measure of reality or value. Another risk is spiritual or intellectual superiority. When you begin to question consensus reality, it can feel like waking up from a dream while others are still asleep. The ego loves this. It turns insight into identity. I see through things, they don't. This is another illusion of normal, just with different wallpaper. The goal is not to build a new special category called awake people or conscious people. The goal is to stay honest about how deeply conditioned you still are, how limited your perception still is, and how much mystery remains. Humility is not optional if you are serious about truth. So where does all of this leave you practically? You still have a life to live. You still have relationships, work, and responsibilities. The difference is that you no longer confuse the script with reality. You can play roles without believing they are your essence. You can make plans without worshiping control. You can pursue goals without tying your basic worth to the outcome. You can feel emotions without labeling them as abnormal deviations from an imaginary ideal. In short, you begin to live in direct contact with what is, instead of in constant comparison with what was promised. This shift has consequences that are subtle but profound. Anxiety decreases not because the world becomes safer, but because you stop demanding that it match a fantasy. Shame loosens not because you become perfect, but because you see that the standard you were measuring yourself against was arbitrary and often incoherent. Curiosity returns because your life is no longer a test you can fail, but a series of experiences you can examine directly. None of this guarantees happiness in the superficial sense. It does something more valuable. It reconnects you with reality, and reality, while indifferent, is at least honest. In the end, the illusion of normal is thin. It is kept in place by repetition, fear, and the human tendency to trade truth for comfort. When you stop making that trade, something else comes online, a quieter, more stable sense of being. You are no longer trying to match a template that was never designed for your specific mind, your specific history, your specific moment in time. You begin to sense that the universe was never obligated to give you the life you were advertised. It gave you something more raw and more difficult, a mind capable of questioning, a body capable of feeling, and a brief window of time in which to investigate what any of this means. As you listen to this, you do not need to agree with every point. Agreement is not the goal. The goal is disturbance. a productive disturbance in the structures you took for granted. If, after this, you find yourself pausing before calling something normal or hesitating before blaming yourself for not fitting in, then the work has begun. The illusion of normal does not shatter all at once. It erodes as you keep looking, keep questioning, and keep choosing direct contact with experience over secondhand promises. Reality was never what you were promised. It is stranger, harsher, and more open than that. And that openness, once you stop resisting it, is where an honest life can finally start.